We're talking today with Raymond Lantz of Kent City, Michigan, and the interviewer is James Smither of the Grand Valley State University Veterans History Project. Now, Mr. Lantz, can you begin with some background on yourself? And to begin with, where and when were you born?
September 26, 1922, in Washington, Illinois.
Okay. Now, did your family live there at the time, or were they passing through, or?
No, I think Dad farmed there. I think my dad managed a farm there or something, my father.
Okay. And then how long did you stay there?
I don't remember.
Okay. So,
Not very long.
so where did you move to?
Elkhart, Indiana.
Okay.
No, Constantine, Michigan.
Okay.
And then we went to Elkhart.
Okay.
And then we went back to Constantine.
All right. Now, did you go to high school in Constantine?
Three Rivers.
Okay, 3 Rivers. Because Constantine was too small for a high school?
No, they had a high school.
Okay.
But they didn't have buses then. We drove to school.
Mm-hmm.
The neighbor, we took turns using Dad's car, and we drove to school. I don't know, 5 or 6. It was me and my brother and my sister and the neighbor kids.
Okay.
Car full.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you chose to go to 3 Rivers rather than Constantine?
I went to Constantine maybe through the 7th or 8th grade, maybe. And then I went to 3 Rivers.
Okay.
But I never completed high school. I went first semester of 11th, I think. So I ain't very smart.
All right. Now, what was your father doing for a living when you were living in Constantine?
My dad is a barber.
Okay. And, that's through the 1930s now. That's the Depression era. Did he do other stuff to make ends meet, or did he have enough business as a barber?
He didn't own a shop.
Okay.
What I can remember, I remember Dad, the guy that owned the shop told Dad he'd either have to lay him off or put him on a commission, so he went on a commission.
Mm-hmm.
He cut hair for a quarter. He got 15 cents. The guy that owned the shop got a dime. I remember that.
Okay.
And 5 kids.
Okay. And how old were you when you left high school?
When I left high school?
Yeah, how old were you then? Were you 16 or?
I don't know. Maybe 16, 17.
Okay. And what did you do after you left school?
Worked.
Okay.
Whatever you could find. And jobs was scarce then. I don't know. I worked at Goshen Sash and Door. They made doors.
Mm-hmm.
I worked there a while. I worked on farms.
Okay.
You used to work by the month on the farm, and you lived there. Lived with. You could get like $30 a month. Not much.
Mm-hmm.
But you got 3 meals.
Right. And a roof over your head, so.
And a warm bedroom.
Right.
So
That was okay.
wasn't that bad.
All right. Now, do you remember how you heard about Pearl Harbor?
Yeah.
Okay. How did you learn about Pearl Harbor?
I was working in Grand Rapids, and my folks lived in Constantine, and I was on the way home on a Sunday night to go to work Monday. And Myron, you know where Myron is?
Yes.
And you go out before the expressway, and you went through Myron, and there was a curve just out of Myron. I was on that curve when it come on my car radio.
Okay.
I remember that.
All right. Now, before Pearl Harbor, were you aware of what was going on in the world? Did you know there was a war in Europe, and did you think we might get into a war?
Oh yeah. Well, I didn't think about whether we'd get in it or not.
Okay.
But I knew I knew Hitler was on the run, and stuff like that. Yeah. I knew
Okay,
that.
so you're aware of that. Okay. And now, what kind of job did you have in Grand Rapids?
sheet metal.
Okay, so you had a factory job at that point, or were you doing sheet metal construction?
No, I was gone with my wife.
Mm-hmm.
She was my girlfriend,
Okay.
and she lived in Grand Rapids. That's how I happened to wind up in Grand Rapids.
All right.
Then, let's see. Then I lived. I was to her place on Sunday, and I slept in my car Sunday night. And Monday morning I went to the unemployment bureau, and they sent me to Michigan Blowpipe, sheet metal.
Okay.
And I worked for them 17 years.
All right. And so you were working for them when you got your draft notice?
Yeah, and after, both.
Okay. All right. Now, do you remember when you got the draft notice?
November 42.
Okay.
Maybe around this.
Now-
You went and got your exam,
Right.
then you got 14 days.
Mm-hmm.
So it would have been right about in the middle of November or something.
Okay. All right. So you go, you get the exam, and then where did they send you first once you report?
Camp Grant, Illinois.
Okay. And was that just for processing?
I think pretty much.
Okay.
Yeah.
And how did they get you to Camp Grant?
How did we get there?
Yeah.
By train.
Okay.
You had to go down a depot. You got orders when to go,
Right.
and they put you on a train.
Okay. And you get there, and then where do they send you from Camp Grant? Where do you go next?
Camp Beale, California.
Okay. And how do they get you there?
Train.
Okay. How long did that train ride take?
Over a week.
Okay. How did you spend your time while you were on the train?
Oh, I don't know. You know, during the war, they didn't sell seats. They sold tickets.
Mm-hmm.
If you could get on, you went. You know, they did. I went from California to Chicago one time on a train without a seat. I didn't have a seat. You know, but I remember this lady on there, and I think she was, if I remember right, I think she was going to see her son in the service, and she must have had money or something. But she'd go to the diner and eat, and when she'd go there, she'd give me her seat until she got back.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but I remember how kind she was.
All right. So it's kind of an adventure. Now, if it takes that long train trip going out, then would you sometimes have to stop and let other trains go by you?
Yeah.
Or?
Yeah, and it depended a lot. Of course, I didn't know all this stuff, but it depended a lot. The main thing I was trying to get shipped was equipment, you know, steel and what have you. And but then at other times the troop trains took priority. You went through and they sidetracked.
Right. Okay. Camp Beale, California. What part of California was that in?
Sacramento.
Okay, Sacramento.
About 30 miles north of Sacramento.
Okay. So nothing really big very close to you then? You're kind of out in the country?
Well, the closest town was St. Mary's.
Okay.
It wasn't very big.
Right.
It was a small town.
Okay.
Until Camp Beale moved there.
Okay.
Then it was big.
Okay. Now, what was the first part of your training like? When you got to Camp Beale, what did you do?
Basic.
Okay. And what did that consist of?
What do you do?
Yeah.
Exercises, marches. I don't know. Get you physically fit.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
We did 32 miles in 8 hours marching, full pack.
Okay.
46 pounds.
Okay. Now, at this point, were you part of a unit, or were you just getting training?
You was in your unit.
Okay. And what unit were you with at that point?
The 13th Armored Division.
Okay, so you're with the 13th Armored Division.
Company B, 3rd Battalion, I think. Yeah, they broke them down. You
Right.
know.
And was that an infantry regiment or a tank unit or?
I was in medics.
Okay, you're the medics. But you were attached to a combat unit?
Well, the 13th Armored Division had everything.
Right.
You know, it was a division which was what, 13,000 men?
Okay.
A division, I think a division's 13,000 men.
13 to 15 depends on the size of it.
Outfits.
Right. Yeah, but anyway, that's a big unit. So were you in their medical battalion?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. I think that was like the 83rd. Was that the?
Pardon?
Do you remember the number of the battalion? Was that the 83rd?
83rd Medical
Right.
Battalion.
Okay. All right.
Company B.
Okay. There we go.
Now, every battalion has 3 companies.
Right.
Am I right?
Yeah. Well, some battalions have 4. It just depends on the organization.
Well, you'd have 3
and then 3
companies
platoons.
at headquarters.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. But the 83rd is the key there because somebody who's trying to research this, they'll look for the 13th Armored Division and then 83rd Medical Battalion, and then they could locate you and place you. Okay. Yeah. So you already knew what unit you were in. Now, what did your main job wind up being?
My main job?
Yeah.
A cook.
Okay. And how did you wind up becoming a cook?
I used to volunteer for KP, keep from marching.
Okay.
And the mess sergeant, you know, he usually get KP for punishment.
Mm-hmm.
And he asked me one day, he says, how come you get so much KP? You don't behave or what? And I said, no, I volunteer for KP. He said, you want to be a cook? I said, yeah. So, just a few days, I was in cook school. 16 hours a day. You had to work in the kitchen 8 and you had to go to school 8.
Okay. What did they teach you in cook school?
Peel taters. No, I don't know. You got to learn how to cook, and then you got to learn the value of food. You know, like so you can get a balanced diet. Of course, it didn't make any difference because they brought you cooked what they brought you.
Right.
And stuff like that. You know.
Okay.
And learning how to cook and stuff. You know.
You have to figure out how much food to prepare for a unit and that kind of thing?
Yeah, but your rations pretty much control that, you know. See, the government made 30-day menus. Every month you got a menu for a month. But that don't mean you draw them rations. You drawed whatever they had.
Mm-hmm.
You see what I mean?
Yep.
The menu might say beef and you might get lamb or something like that, you know. Because that's what they had. Mm-hmm. And where you were, your rations, a lot of times you could almost relate them. We used to get a lot of mutton because they had them sheep ranches. You know, safe freight, I suppose.
Right.
I don't know.
Sure.
You know?
All right. Now in California, I mean, did you at least get a lot of fruit and vegetables?
Well, I would say so. You know one thing about the military, their rations were nutritious.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you got a good variety of vitamins and minerals and stuff. You know, so.
Okay. About how long do you think you stayed at Camp Beale?
1 year.
Okay. Now, over the course of that time, did you get to go off the base very much?
Yeah, you get passes.
And where would you go when you got a pass?
St. Mary's.
Okay. So that's just the local small town there.
Yeah.
All right.
I never went out. I never got many passes.
Okay. Now, at this point in time, were you married yet?
Yeah.
Okay. And how much contact did you have with your wife at that point?
She'd write a letter every day.
And did you write back every day?
Yeah.
Good.
Well,
Or when you could.
when you could. Sometimes you couldn't. But yeah, she wrote to me every day.
Okay. Now, what was she doing while you were gone?
Worked on the. She lived with my folks and her folks between.
Mm-hmm.
And her and my sister, sis lived with mom too, my parents, and they worked on a farm somewhere for, I think they raised some kind of vegetable. And I don't know, they weeded it or I don't know what she did.
Okay.
But that's something to do with the war.
All right. Now, during that year that you spent at Camp Beale, did you ever get a leave to go back home, or did you have to stay in California the whole time?
No, after basic you get to go home.
Okay.
14 days.
All right.
14 days, 7 home and 7 on the road.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
And now, what kind of people did you have working with you in the kitchen unit and that kind of thing? Where were they from, or how old were they?
Well, there's a lot of them. Well, I want to say they was. I was in the service with one guy who was 42.
Mm-hmm.
That was the oldest that I can remember, and he was a cook. I worked with him,
Mm-hmm.
and but by and large, it's just like everybody else. They drafted, you know.
Right. Okay, so young guys, basically.
Yeah.
Okay. All right. Now, when your unit was, did you ever go out on any kind of maneuvers or into the field with the unit?
Oh yeah.
Okay, so what kinds of things would you do? I mean, if the unit was doing an exercise or something, what would you do?
Cook.
Okay. But
in
did
a
you?
truck.
Okay.
Yeah, on a truck.
Now, did the truck have like stoves on it or things like that, or did it carry them?
Gasoline stoves. They burn gasoline like a camp stove.
Because
only bigger.
well, gasoline or kerosene?
Gasoline.
Gasoline. Okay, that would seem a little dangerous.
And you pump them up, you know, and just like a Coleman.
Yeah.
Only bigger.
Mm-hmm.
They were bigger. I used to. I don't remember where I was cooking. I had like 20 some of them stoves. Yeah, I had to get up an hour early just to pump the stoves up. They had to pump all them tanks up with air, you know. They was under air pressure or something.
Okay.
You have to get up and pump them tanks full of, and fill them with gas and get them ready to go. Yeah.
All right. And would you have to stay out overnight when you did those exercises?
Oh yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And so where would you sleep?
Pup tents. You know, them little pup tents.
Right.
They held 2 guys. You know, and when you packed, each one of you carried half of it.
Right. So you each have a shelter half, I guess is what they call it.
Pardon?
They have a shelter half, I guess. That's what they called it in Vietnam anyway. But one half of a tent.
No, one guy that has a tent.
Oh, okay.
The other guy that has the stakes.
Oh, okay.
That kind of stuff.
All right. So
Yeah.
one piece of canvas. Okay. And would you have to dig foxholes and that sort of thing, or did you just?
Did you what?
Did you have to dig in? Did you have to dig foxholes or things like that?
Yeah.
Okay. And did they? How much? Did they give the cooks any kind of weapons training?
Any kind of what?
Weapons training. Did you have to shoot a rifle and that kind of thing?
Oh, yeah.
Or just in did you do that just in basic, or would you do that afterward?
During basic.
Okay.
You go on a rifle range. And then they had the M1.
Mm-hmm.
Then later in the war they got the carbine. I might be wrong, but I think an M1 weighed 21 pounds.
No, a BAR weighed 21 pounds, but an M1 didn't weigh that much. It weighed 8 pounds or something like that.
I don't know. But it was heavy.
Mm-hmm.
Then the carbine weighed like 5.5,
Yeah,
6
yeah.
pounds.
Carbine was lighter. Yeah. Now, were you issued a carbine eventually?
Yeah,
Okay.
not no ammunition, though.
Right.
But you clean your gun. You clean. You went to the rifle range. Different things.
Okay. Now, when you think about the year that you spent at Camp Beale, are there any particular events or things that happened that sort of stand out in your memory?
When my oldest daughter was born, Blanche come out to see me on the train.
Okay.
She had a 3-week-old baby.
Wow.
All the way.
Traveling all the way out there.
You know, and she stayed, I think maybe a couple weeks. Then she went back.
Mm-hmm. And, I mean, would she have to stay off base at that point? Or could she stay on the base, or did she have to be somewhere else?
Well, most cooks got Class A passes.
Mm-hmm.
If you wasn't working, you had a pass. You just go.
Okay.
It was like kind of like a permanent pass.
Okay. So did some of them actually live off the base?
I think in California, I don't remember. We had a room. I know that. But you know, if you're cooking, you change shifts at noon.
Mm-hmm.
Then you cook supper, clean the kitchen, breakfast, dinner, serve dinner, and then you go off shift.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're on the shift, it's almost 24 hours. You know, you get out of there at 10 o'clock at night and get up again at 3 or something during your shift, and then of course you get a day off.
Right.
And on the day off, you could go to town if you could cook.
All right.
Yeah.
Okay. So you say you're at Camp Beale for about a year. So you get to the end of 1943, and then you go someplace else?
Camp Bowie.
Okay. Camp Bowie. It's in Texas?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
And were you still with the 13th Armored Division at that time? Or had you switched?
I think I was in the Fourth Army.
Well, the 4th Army might be the training command in that part of the country. But the whole Army. An Army is a lot of divisions, so it's a lot of people. But you might, but that's still, I mean, that might have been, because were
Seems
you,
like my address, though, was Fourth Army.
okay. Well, were you with the Medical Battalion at that time?
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
I was always in the medics.
Okay. Well, and the thing, armies would have medical units, just part of the Army.
Yeah.
So that might be, and if you were at where the Army headquarters was, then that could be your address.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Okay.
I might. That's been a long time. Yeah. When I was in Texas, my address was Fourth Army. I know
Right.
that.
Right.
54th Evacuation Hospital.
There you go. Because an evacuation hospital, that's a unit that's going to be attached to a larger unit, not to a division. A division would have the field hospital and a hospital battalion like you were in. So an evacuation hospital is a level up from that. So that would make sense. So 54th Evacuation Hospital. Okay. Were you still a cook for them?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Now, did you go there by yourself?
Pardon?
Okay. Now, when you went from the 83rd and the 13th Armored Division down to the 4th Army, did a whole bunch of you go together?
The whole outfit.
Okay, so the whole battalion? Or the cook unit? Or
There's more than one train full.
okay.
I don't know.
All right.
Yeah, we went.
Okay. So they moved you and they changed your name?
I got in a different outfitters.
Yeah.
I don't remember. I know one thing. Then we left Camp Beale and went to Camp Bowie. All the cooks got the flu.
Okay.
And we wound up in Camp Bowie, Texas. I went in this kitchen. When I got down there was me and the mess sergeant left. The only ones that hadn't been dropped off at hospital.
Right.
On the way. And so we went in this kitchen. And it had been shut down, I don't know, a week, 2 weeks or something. And the mess sergeant went to light the oven and it blew up. And burned all his hair off and
Wow.
everything. So they took him to the hospital.
Okay. So now it's just you.
That left me. And I remember I got up and I cooked breakfast. They give you a lot of KPs, a lot of hell. And I cooked breakfast and served breakfast, took off my apron and went to sick bay. And I had the flu. And I was in the hospital. That was bad flu. I don't remember what they called it, but you was sick. I was in the hospital like 7-8 days. You know, but I don't know. I know what they did. They borrowed cooks from other outfits. Yeah. And then when I got back, everybody in the outfit had to work in the kitchen a week, so that they could get by if something happened again.
Okay. Now, what part of Texas is Camp Bowie in? Was that near a town?
Fort Worth, Dallas.
Okay. Okay.
What's the town? Camp Bowie, Texas. I don't remember. It was about 50, 60 miles to Fort Worth.
Okay.
Because I used to, on pass, I go to Fort Worth sometimes.
All right. And how long did you stay at Camp Bowie? Was that until you went overseas, or did you go?
Yeah.
Okay.
Well, you went from there to Seattle. And then you got on a ship in Seattle.
All right. Now, was life at Camp Bowie any different than it was at Camp Beale, or did you just do all the same things?
I cooked. But Blanche lived down there almost a year. She come down there.
Okay.
And I lived off the base there.
All right. And what rank were you by then?
By then?
Were you a sergeant yet, or corporal, or?
I was first cook. That would be T4.
Okay.
T4. That's the same as a buck sergeant, except it's a technician.
Yes.
A T's technician.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So at that rank, you can live off the base.
Yeah.
Because I think the privates normally can't. So, but anyway.
When Blanche come to Camp Beale, but you know, I wasn't a private. You know, I was only a private like through basic. You know, because I was in the kitchen and I took my work serious.
Yeah,
You
and
know,
probably
that's how I went from peeling taters to a mess sergeant.
Right.
You know, because I took it serious.
Okay. All right. Now, was it hotter in Texas than it was in California, or about the same?
California, when I got there, it was raining, and it rained all winter. And one morning I woke up and the sun was shining. Never rained again until fall. And when we left, it was raining again.
Okay. Time to leave then.
And I had that red, slippery mud, you know, terrible. Yeah, but they had a lot of rain there around Sacramento, I guess. If you went down farther, they didn't have so much rain, the way I understand it.
Okay.
But,
All right. Now, at this point, you know, you're going through well into 1944. Are you paying much attention to the news of the war at this point and how the war was going?
my main source of news was Stars and Stripes.
Right.
Is that the
Yeah.
military?
It's a military newspaper. Yeah.
Yeah, I used to get that.
Okay.
But you gotta remember, they didn't have cell phones like now. You know, I mean, you know.
No cell phones, no television.
You didn't have television, you didn't have radio. But most places, your reception was pretty poor. You know, a lot of static, and they weren't perfected like now.
Right.
You know.
Okay. Now, did you have relatives who were in the military at the same time? Yeah, I'm asking you for the record. So, did you have, how many brothers did you have in the service?
All of us.
Okay.
It was me and my brother Leon, Claude, Frank, me, and that one guy there is my sister's husband.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how there was 6 of us.
Right.
I don't know. Oh, Jean.
Yeah.
Jean is my oldest brother's wife.
Right.
And when he got drafted, she joined the WACs.
All right.
And,
And so, did you correspond with any of them, or just with people at home?
I think they're all gone.
No. But when you were in the service, though, did you write to each other, or did you just write to your mother, or?
Oh, no. I write to my brother.
Okay.
And sometimes he couldn't write, but you know, I wrote.
Okay. All right.
My dad wrote me a postcard every day.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes you would get like 10 postcards at one mail call. But I know he always said at the bottom, take your training serious, son, you probably need it. He always said that.
Okay.
I guess he learned how to write that pretty good or something.
Right.
But he wrote all of us kids a postcard every morning before he went.
Okay. All right.
He worked in a defense plant and farmed. And, I think Dad was farming 160 acres. Worked at a defense plant 10 hours, 6 days.
Wow.
He was probably pretty busy.
I think so. All right. Now, did you start to think that maybe the war was going to be over before you got in it?
Before I got in?
Yeah.
No.
Oh, you thought you were going to get there sooner or later?
You knew you were going to get there sooner or later.
Okay.
It's just a matter of when.
All right. So, okay. So when did you leave Camp Bowie? Was it late in 44 or was it 45?
I think it'd be 44.
Okay. And,
I was in Hawaii quite a while.
oh, okay. All right. So your next step. So you said you went to Seattle, and was that just to ship out from, or?
Yeah, you shipped out of Seattle.
Okay. Now, at this point, were you still with the 54th Evacuation Hospital? Did your unit go together?
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah, I think they did, yeah.
All right. And then you said you go from Seattle then to Hawaii?
Mm-hmm.
All right. And then how did they get you to Hawaii? Were you
How
on-
did you get there?
Yeah.
Ship.
Okay. And what do you remember about that sea voyage?
About what?
The sea voyage, the trip on the ship?
I don't know. I cooked. One thing about a cook, the rest of the guys that shoot craps and play poker, you worked. No matter where you was, if you was a cook, you worked. See, like on the ship, you worked in the Navy kitchen, but you worked.
Okay.
You know.
Now, did the Navy have better food than you did? Or about the same?
It depends. I had a reputation for running the best kitchen in the battalion. It depended on what you did with the rations you got. You know, you could give them stew. But I'm gonna tell you, they would rather have a 2.5 or 3 ounce piece of steak than they would beef stew. And a lot of cooks will whack it up and make beef stew until you stuck out of your ears. You know, but I didn't do that. You know, they would rather have. Sometimes they did that on a kind of you didn't have enough to. But I used to cheat. I used to save stuff in the refrigerator and build it up, and then you know what I mean.
Yeah.
Then you run your kitchen efficient.
Right.
You know, and a lot of times I could have. I used to post a guy out there to keep out people from other outfits trying to get in my kitchen to eat. That's the truth. You know, and I'd post a guy out there. If he wasn't in the outfit, they didn't get in the line. You know, because they used to try to come in my kitchen to eat. Because I run I guess I run a better kitchen. I
Right.
tried to.
Okay.
But,
Now, on the trip over to Hawaii, did a lot of guys get seasick?
yeah.
Okay. Was the weather bad, or were they just not used to being on a ship?
Both.
Okay.
Both.
And how long did it take to get to Hawaii?
Long time. I don't know. I don't know if I remember. Maybe a couple weeks.
Okay.
You know.
Did you go with a convoy, or did the ship go by itself?
I think there was 3 ships, maybe.
Okay. And do you remember if you did a lot of zigzagging, or if you just went straight to Hawaii? Did you change course a lot?
I don't know, but all ships zigzagged.
Yeah.
That's how you kept from getting bombed.
Yeah. Or torpedoed?
Yeah, or whatever.
Submarines were the main risk.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Now, when you get to Hawaii, where did you go?
Schofield Barracks.
Okay. And how was that different from Camp Bowie or Camp Beale?
Well, Schofield is not a camp. That's a what do you call it?
Well, they call
Fort.
it. Yeah.
That's a permanent. That's a permanent outfit.
Mm-hmm.
Camp Beal and Camp Bowie, they were shacks put up with tar paper on them. They built 25 of them a day or something, you know, for the war effort.
Mm-hmm.
But they was okay.
Okay.
They was okay. You know.
But you had more permanent buildings at Schofield, and so did you have a real kitchen to work in
Where?
at Schofield? And do they have a kitchen building at Schofield?
Yeah.
Okay.
I had a kitchen there. Yeah, all them buildings were spent.
Mm-hmm.
And what was they? 3 stories, maybe?
Could be.
I think they are. I think they're 3 stories. After the war, me and Banshee went over there. My daughter's husband was stationed there, and we went over to visit them.
Mm-hmm.
And I went to Schofield Barracks and around. And then by that time they had made a museum out of Pearl Harbor.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You know, I went out there to see that. Arizona.
Yeah.
There, is that still leaking oil? That was
I think
leaking
so.
oil.
I think so.
Or did it all leak out by now?
I think I saw something recently. It was still leaking oil, but yeah, okay. By the
But
time
that apparently had an oil leak, you know, what they burnt. I guess that's what they burned in their
Yeah.
boilers. And they must have had millions of gallons of it on board. But apparently it leaked real slow. You could stand on the fence, so they had to walk. And you could see the oil in the water. You'd see it come up. And you could see a little bit of the ship yet.
Mm-hmm.
A little bit, the stacks of that.
Okay. Now, when you were there during the war, did you get down into? Did you go to Pearl Harbor? Did you go to Honolulu, or did you just stay in the barracks?
You could. I went there. I met my brother there. He was in the Navy, and his ship come there.
Mm-hmm.
And me and him went to Honolulu, maybe, or something. I got a big pass. I don't know, I think I had like 4 or 5 days. Because that's what they did in there, you know, if your brother or any relatives, you know, you got treated special, you know,
Mm-hmm.
they give you a day off or time off, you know. But Leon's ship come there, and his wife, you know, they censored all your mail. You had that V-mail, you know,
Yeah.
they take photos of it,
Mm-hmm.
and then it was a letter this big, you get it this big. Yeah, and I would get, from Leon's wife, I'd get letters, but of course they would cross it out if you give any locations or anything.
Mm-hmm.
But I put 2 and 2 together, and I knew that his ship was heading for Why? Because he had told Ellen some way. I don't know how he told her. And so I'd go down there, you know, to Pearl Harbor. Oh boy, I went down there for a month and a half to see if his ship was in. You know. I went down there one morning, and sure enough, it was there.
How about that?
And I remember they put me in a boat, and they took me out to the ship. And then, I don't know, I stayed all night there. And then, I don't know, then Liam stayed at my place, you know. And I used to, guys' wives would come and stuff, and they'd eat there, you know, and I always had one table with a tablecloth on it. You know, and when they'd get company, you know, why, they'd eat at the mess hall, you know. And I draw rations for that. I think, well, I don't remember, but I think 10 or 12 rations a month for guests to feed other people, you know. So they were pretty fair about that kind of stuff, you know.
All right. And then, at what point, now when you were in Hawaii, do you know if your unit were they treating any casualties from the Pacific Theater, or were you just looking after the people who were on the base?
Well, they had, when I was in Hawaii, I didn't feed the hospital, not there.
Okay.
That was in Japan.
All right.
All I did there was feed our outfit. But they had hospitals there, but I don't think I fed them. I don't remember a lot.
Well, do you know what outfit you were with then in Hawaii? Because you were with the 54th Evacuation Hospital.
Probably. Yeah.
But then,
I'm not sure I can tell you. But
Okay.
would it be on my discharge? Probably would.
maybe we can check that. But basically, you were feeding the sort of the staff of your own unit, but you weren't your own company, but you weren't dealing with doctors or other people like that.
Feed?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, you took turns cooking an officer's mess. They had a different mess hall.
Okay.
Yeah, and then they pulled cooks out of the different company. You do a week at a time at officer's mess. You go down there.
Okay. All right. And then when did you leave Schofield Barracks? Was it 1945 now when you lived? Okay.
It'd be at 45.
All right. And do you remember if you had heard by then about Iwo Jima or Okinawa or anything like that before you left?
Did I ever heard about it?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Okay.
You know it was there.
Well, I'm trying to figure out when you leave Hawaii. So if you're in Hawaii when Iwo Jima happens, for instance, that's February. The landing in Okinawa is in April. So I was just wondering if you remembered hearing about those battles.
Yeah, you read about them.
Okay.
At the Stars and Stripes.
Right. Yeah. And were you still in Hawaii when you were reading about them?
Well, when they dropped the big one, I was in Hawaii.
Oh.
No, I wasn't either.
Okay, by the time they dropped the bomb, you might have been out in the Pacific by then. Because didn't you leave Hawaii and you said you went to...
Japan.
Okay. But before you went to Japan, you stopped over someplace else?
Yeah, but I don't know where that was.
Okay.
It could have just been, you know, they had a lot of islands.
Right.
And it might have just been where it was deep enough where the ship could anchor.
Well, sure.
And sit there. I never got off the ship.
Okay.
As I remember.
And they were assembling the fleet to get ready to go and invade Japan.
It was gonna until they signed off.
Right. So by the time they dropped the bomb or whatever, you would have been out in the Pacific someplace,
Probably.
not that island or near there.
Yeah, I probably was.
Okay. Now, do you remember hearing the news about dropping the bomb, or just did you figure that out later?
No, I heard the news.
Okay. And do you remember where you were when you heard about that?
No,
Okay.
I think I was on a ship.
Okay. That's quite likely. Okay. So in any case, now when you're on this ship this time, was it just a troop transport ship or something else?
It was LST.
LST, the big long ship with the doors in front? That's an LST.
Like a landing barge?
Yeah, but a really big one like the one they have over in Muskegon.
Yeah. It was LST, they call it.
Yeah. Okay.
That's a
Landing
ship tank.
Yes.
Is that what that stands
Yes,
for?
yes it is.
Hey, my mind's pretty good.
There you go, yeah, because you could have tanks inside and you open the doors in the bow and they could drive right out.
Oh, yeah, you drive right out.
Okay. So now, were you cooking on the LST?
Was I cooking where?
On the LST.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you was a cook, you were.
You always cooked. Okay.
No matter where you went.
So you're doing that again.
Yeah, I cooked on there.
Okay. Now, do you remember what the trip was like or what sailing on an LST was like? I mean, was it better to be on a regular troop ship or was it okay?
I don't know. You just took it in stride. That's where you was.
And when you were on the LST, did you hit any really bad weather?
Did I what?
Hit any really bad weather?
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. So what's it like to be on an LST during a storm?
Well, I can remember that the waves would come, the swells or whatever, they'd be between you and the ship behind you, and when it was high, you couldn't see the other ship. So they was high.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you could look, and then when the wave rolled on, you'd see the ship, and then another wave would come, and the ship would disappear. It was in a hollow, don't you see?
Mm-hmm.
Well, yeah, it was rough. Yeah, I remember this guy was so seasick, and he'd lay on the deck in his own puke. You know, and I took him out some soda crackers and I took it out on the deck to him and see if I could get something on his stomach, you know.
Mm-hmm.
He'd try. He'd eat them crackers and he'd go right down, right back up.
Oh well.
But you know, they dropped him off.
Mm-hmm.
He was so seasick, he would have died. He would have died if they hadn't. I don't remember how they did that, but they dropped him.
Okay.
He didn't go the whole voyage. They must have put him in a hospital or something. I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
But I'll never forget how sick that guy was. He was so sick he'd lay in his own puke. He wouldn't even try to move. He'd just lay there and he'd just come out, you know. And he'd try to eat,
Mm-hmm.
you know. Beef broth.
Mm-hmm.
You try to get that down him, you know, because that'd stay on the stomach better. And he would try to drink it, you know, but it wouldn't stay down.
Okay. Now, by this time, you didn't have any trouble yourself, or did you get seasick too, or?
No.
Okay.
I was, the only time I was even close to seasick, I was washing out a steam kettle, them great big steam kettles, and you went up on a ladder or platform and scrubbed them out, you know, and there was some water in there, and there was one potato.
Mm.
And that'd keep bouncing back and forth while I was trying to clean that. And I did get kind of seasick then. I had to come out, I was bent over down in there, and I had to stand up, you know, otherwise I'd have lost my cookies.
Right.
But I never was seasick enough to throw up.
Mm-hmm.
I never threw up.
Okay.
Lucky for that, you know.
Okay. Now, what happens to you once the Japanese surrender? Now, what do you do?
After the Japs surrendered,
Yeah.
we went into Japan.
Okay.
About 1 or 2 days after they signed with MacArthur?
Mm-hmm.
Is that who it was?
Yeah, MacArthur was on the deck of the
What was
Missouri.
the name of the ship?
Missouri.
Yeah. Yeah. Right after they signed, then we went in. Wow. Maybe
Okay.
a day, 2 days.
All right.
Like that.
And then did you go into Tokyo Bay and one of the cities there or somewhere else?
I don't remember. We went somewhere. We got on the ship or off the ship,
Yep.
and I went in and we cleaned up a barn. It was a barn, and we cleaned that up for a kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
We went right in. I remember we used to use lye water, scrub the floors, clean it all up, you know. But I don't remember just where that was. But you had some, excuse me, you had some, in the barns, you had some tables that we actually built, you know, there was nothing there.
Mm-hmm.
We had our stoves that you come off the ship,
Right.
and then it's up to me to get in the kitchen and boil them down and, you know, and get ready to cook in there. But we had some K's. I think maybe a day or 2 days or something. We just had K's.
So K rations.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Now, for that kind of stove, what kind of fuel did you use?
On the stoves?
Yeah.
Gas,
Okay.
gasoline.
Okay.
Them tanks held 1 gallon, 1 gallon. And you could cook a meal on you had to sometimes fill them between meals.
Okay. Now, what kind of area were you set up in? It was if this was a barn, were you kind of out in the country someplace a little bit, or was there a town nearby?
Yeah, there wasn't much left. I remember Japan was flat, flat. And I also remember that every intersection where 2 roads crossed was bombed out. You know, they was in bad shape. They was in bad shape.
Yeah. Now, did you see much of the civilian population there?
Oh yeah.
Okay. And what impression did you have of them?
Well, if you want to know the truth, I used to feel sorry for them. I used to feel sorry for them, even after what they did to us.
Yeah.
You know, for years, well, I still haven't, but I tried to overcome it. You know, but for years, I didn't care too much for Japs. You know, but you get over it. It ain't the people's fault. They're just like us, you know. And I had this. I had a lot of Jap help in the kitchen. I think our government paid them guys to work in there. I think.
Probably.
But and then I had Jimmy, and he lived in San Francisco. And when they bombed Pearl Harbor, his dad thought Japan was going to win, so they went back to Japan. He was originally from Japan.
Mm-hmm.
And he worked in my kitchen as an interpreter, Jimmy, he was. And then I'd tell him to tell them.
Okay. Now, was he one of those Japanese civilians? But
Yeah.
it was somebody sent to you? Yeah.
Took him back. I think he was 6 when he went back.
Okay.
So
he wasn't very old then.
4 years old. He was 10, 12 years old.
Okay, so he's just a kid, but
Yeah, but you
but
know
helpful.
what? He was maybe he's a little older than that. He was a pilot, and he's gonna crash your plane. What do they call it?
kamikaze.
Yeah,
Okay, so he might have been a little older than 10,
yeah. He would have had to have been
but they would have
because
used
he
him.
was trained for that.
Okay.
I said, how come you never flew your plane? He says, we didn't have no gas.
Mhm.
That's what he told me. That's why he didn't have no gas. But I used him there in the kitchen.
Okay.
And then we had a picket fence around, and them Japs, they would tear them pickets off. They sneak through the fence, and they had like a burlap sack. It looked like a burlap sack, and they'd go in my garbage can. They scoop that stuff out. That's how hungry they were.
Mm-hmm.
They'd put it in them bags, throw it over their shoulder, and then old coffee and junk would be running out of the bag, you know, and then my mess officer told me to post a guard out there, but I never did.
Mm-hmm.
By that time, you know, your ropes. I didn't pay too much attention to them.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I never, whatever they stole, I didn't have to bury.
Yeah. You know, if it was just your garbage they were taking, and
It was garbage.
yeah.
But it wasn't garbage to them. It was food.
Mm-hmm.
You know, but I can see that. Yeah, you know, and the garbage cans would be contaminated. They wouldn't be sanitary at all.
Mm-hmm.
Well, you wash them out, but
Yeah, but still, I mean, if
yeah,
it's all you have, it's all you have, I guess.
yeah.
All right. How long did you stay in Japan?
Went in there right after they signed,
Yeah.
and I was discharged in February.
Okay.
So I was only there like 2-3 months.
Okay.
Or something. You know, I was. You had points. You remember?
Mm-hmm.
You had points. I had 29. That's quite a few points. A lot of guys had 22, 23, and that's the more points you had,
Mm-hmm.
the quicker you went home.
So you'd been in longer than some of the other guys in that unit by that
Well,
time.
yeah, and then you got points for overseas. You got points for
Well, combat and things like that.
yeah.
Alright.
You got.
Now, did Hawaii count as being overseas?
Pardon?
Did Hawaii count as being overseas?
Was Hawaii?
Overseas.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Well, then it wasn't a state.
Right. It's true. It's territory.
It wasn't. It wasn't a state of the United States then.
Right.
I don't remember just when it was, but
That.
it's after the war.
Oh yeah, 59 or something like that.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
okay. All right. So now, when you talk to people who were in combat units and things like that, like at the end of the war in Europe, they originally it was like 85 points you had to have to be discharged. But after that, the numbers go down and as they work their way through.
Discharging them.
Yeah, yeah. And so by the time you get to the end of 1945, your 29 points looks pretty good.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, a lot of, but there didn't too many people have that many points.
Mm-hmm.
A lot of them that I knew was in their 20s.
Right.
You know, but when they had 70, 80 points, they might have been career men, you know.
Well, or if they were in combat units, because you get you get points a lot
they could
faster.
have had some battle pay
Mm-hmm.
or battle stripes. You
Yeah.
know, they get for every battle they got some points and stuff like that.
Yeah. But
I had to stay. They didn't have a mess sergeant to take my place, and when my number called, they made me stay 30 days longer because I didn't have nobody to run the kitchen, I guess.
okay.
And,
Now, when you were in Japan, did you ever go into any of the larger cities? Did you get to Tokyo or any place like that?
no, I didn't travel much. There wouldn't be nothing to see anyway. You know, and it was so bombed out.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I went for I went for a walk one day, and this burned out building, and there was a piece of metal laying there, you know, a big sheet, and I moved it, and down under there was 5 or 6 Japs. They was living in that. That was their shelter.
Mm-hmm.
And I tell you, they were scared to death of me. They were scared to death of me. But they lived down in there. I guess. I couldn't understand what they were saying, but I remember I give this Jap a loaf of stale bread to take home. He went out the gate and the MPs caught him. And they brought him back to my kitchen.
Mm-hmm.
And I'll never forget how scared that Jap was. He was scared to death. And of course I told the MPs I'd give it to him. So they let him take it.
Mm-hmm.
Stale. My men ain't gonna eat it. Or I wouldn't serve it,
Mm-hmm.
But so I give it to that Jap, The MPs caught him going out. They thought he stole it,
Sure.
So
Okay, now this tape is about up, so we're going to stop here. All right, we were talking about your time in Japan after the war, but now you seem to be somebody who behaved yourself pretty well.
oh, yeah.
You didn't get in a whole lot of trouble and things. Now, did some of the other men in your unit get themselves into trouble, go off base, and?
AWOLs,
Mm-hmm.
some of them. A lot of them guys with AWOLs, they'd get drinking and stuff, But I never did.
Yeah. Well, there's drinking and there's chasing women, which is the other thing.
Chasing women, yeah. I never did.
Mm-hmm.
Oh.
Well, it wasn't very healthy to do some of those things.
Huh?
It wasn't very healthy to do some of those
Well, that
things.
was dangerous.
Yeah.
That was dangerous, But I was in the service with a guy, his name was Sam Fowler. And he couldn't read or write. And during the war, that didn't make no difference. They took you anyhow.
Mm-hmm.
But I used to write letters for Sam. He'd tell me what to write. And then he had a girlfriend, and he'd get letters from his girlfriend, and I'd read them, because Sam couldn't read,
Mm-hmm.
And he worked in the kitchen there, and I taught Sam how to read. Not good, but
Mm-hmm.
I taught him to read a little bit and to write a little bit and stuff. But I think his girlfriend thought that he wrote the letters.
Okay.
I think. I never questioned that, I didn't want to embarrass him, but I think that from what she'd write back and stuff, I don't think she knew I was writing them for Sam.
Right.
But I always said, if I had to go out in combat, I'd just soon go with Sam as anybody.
Mm-hmm.
He didn't have a lot of education, but he lacked a lot of being a long ways from dumb.
Mm-hmm.
He was a smart cookie,
Sure.
A lot of them people are.
Yeah.
A lot of them people are. Yeah.
All right.
I think sometimes right now, you're being a school teacher, I better be careful. But I'm going to tell you, sometimes they put too much emphasis on college.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have to be, you don't have to have 2 or 3 degrees to make a living.
No, you don't.
What's more important than that is work ethics.
Mm-hmm.
I know, I hired people.
Sure.
I had my own place for 35 years. I've hired a lot of people.
Yeah.
And
there's
and
a lot
I'll
of
take,
jobs.
like I was just telling you about Sam, see?
Mm-hmm.
I'll take, I did sheet metal work, and I had his name was Jim Ness. And he worked for me, he couldn't read or write either. He was one of the best sheet metal men I ever knew in my life.
Mm-hmm.
And I could take an order, 4 or 5 pages, and read it to Jim Ness, and he'd stand across my desk and nod his head, and he'd do that whole darn order, right from up here.
Right.
So that don't, because I asked him, why come you never went to school? He said, nobody ever sent me. But they're not, that don't make them dumb. You know what I mean?
Oh, sure.
Well, the smartest man I ever knew was my dad. He went to the 4th grade.
Mm-hmm.
4th grade.
Sure.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, I mean, today we I see a lot of students going to college who shouldn't be in college.
Yep.
Some of them have to grow up more, some of them should be doing something else, but they all think they have to, and you do for a lot, but not for everything. And that was one of the things with people coming out of the war. They could often do lots of things and didn't need the education to go do them.
Well, but things are different now. I think it's more important now.
Well, there are more jobs that you need more education for.
But, well, like I never finished high school. I run my own business 35 years. I don't think I was the dumbest guy around. Probably not the smartest, but not the dumbest either. Because I made it, you know.
Yeah,
I don't know.
I've seen plenty of professors who are pretty dumb sometimes. So, who knows? Okay, let's go back into your story. So you kind of get around kind of the end of 45, beginning of 46. Do you remember if you spent Christmas of 45 in Japan? Or had you? Okay.
Yeah.
So it's early 46 then when you actually leave.
I go home in February.
Right. Okay. Now, how did they get you home?
Ship.
Okay.
And train.
All right. When you were on the ship, did it stop any place on the way back, or did it go all the way to California?
Seattle.
Seattle. Okay.
Washington.
Yeah. And did it stop anywhere, or just go straight across?
No, I think we went pretty much straight across.
Okay. And do you remember what kind of ship you were on that time?
No, but it wasn't an LST. I got a picture of it.
Okay. Was it like a victory ship, that kind of thing? Or?
Yeah. It wasn't a big ship.
Yeah.
It wasn't a huge ship.
Right.
I don't know, 500 feet long or
Yeah,
something.
just a regular transport.
Yeah.
Okay. All right.
And where you slept it stunk. Like feet. There was poor ventilation.
Okay. Now, could you go faster going home or in a straight line?
As I remember it, you did.
Yeah.
When we hit Seattle, and then we got on a train, and I remember I cooked all the way home. You know, like I said, cooks always work. And I thought I was dumb. You know, they had us lined up out there, and he was a captain. He said, the following men fall out, and the first name he hollered was mine. And I had to be a mess sergeant on the train from Seattle to Chicago.
Okay.
And I cooked on that train. And I had 6 hours. And you set up a kitchen in a boxcar. Okay. And I had to draw my rations and bolt down my stoves and get ready to make a kitchen out of it. And I had 6 hours to do that. I had a lot of help, but and then I cooked on that train from there to Chicago.
Wow.
From Chicago to Grand Rapids, I didn't do nothing. But like if you was a cook, you was always working.
Sure.
You know, but I didn't care. You know, I didn't mind it. You know.
Now, did they discharge you at Camp Grant or someplace else?
Camp Grant.
Okay.
Same place you went in.
All right. Yeah. So after that, they couldn't make you cook anyway because you're out of the Army. Okay. Now what? Yeah.
You got, I think Chicago. Then you got on a train and went to Grand Rapids.
Yeah.
But I didn't cook on that one.
Right.
I'd been discharged.
Yeah. Yeah. They couldn't make you cook now.
Yeah.
Okay. Now, once you got back home, what did you do?
Went to Blowpipe, see where I worked before the war.
Okay. All right. And you stayed. You said you stayed with them like 17 years, something like that.
Yeah.
Okay. And then after that, was that when you started your own business?
Yeah.
Okay. All
And
right.
the guy I worked for at Michigan Blowpipe, he come to work for me. Charlie sold out, and I guess he was bored.
Mm-hmm.
And so he was working for me when he died. He was working for me when he died, Charlie was.
Okay.
Know.
All right. And what kind of projects did you work on? What did you help build around here?
Oh, we did, well, Michigan blowpipe.
Well, that and then your own company too.
It mostly sawdust. These furniture factories, you know, they suck the sawdust away from the machines.
Okay.
That kind of stuff. And then I did a lot of pollution control, stuff like that, you know.
Okay. But didn't you? But then with your own company, didn't you also install like heating and air conditioning and ducts and things like that?
Yeah, I had jobs installed in 40-some states.
Okay.
Pretty much all over.
Wow. All right.
Just I didn't have no reps or none. Word of mouth. Word of mouth.
And how many people did you have working for you?
The most I ever had, 62.
Okay.
But I got news for you, that's too many. You can't make no money.
Mm-hmm.
You can't control it.
Okay. Now
But normally, 20.
Okay. Now you worked on projects right around Grand Rapids, and you worked on some of the early buildings at Grand Valley State University, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Grand Valley State College in those days.
Big Rapids, Ferris.
Ferris too. Okay. Yeah, Ferris State is in Big Rapids. Yeah.
Yeah, I did. I don't know, several of them buildings when they was building the college up in Big Rapids.
Yeah.
Ferris.
Yes.
Yeah, I did several of those buildings. Yeah.
All right.
But,
Okay. Now, when you look back on the time that you spent in the Army, what do you think you took out of that? Did you learn anything from that experience, or were you different when you came out at all?
different?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's kind of crazy. I don't know. I had I don't know. I always said it wouldn't have been for Batchy, I'd have probably never made it. You know. But I used to get nightmares and I'd beat her up and
Oh my. Just because you'd be asleep and
she never gave up on me. But I didn't do that on purpose.
Of course not.
You know, I wouldn't realize it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you're so keyed up and you're trained to fight.
Mm-hmm.
You're cocky, bullheaded, you know what I mean? And it was hard for the first couple of years.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, do you think you took anything positive out of the experience?
Oh yeah.
Okay. Out of being so what was good about being in the Army?
What was good about it?
Yeah.
Well, we had a job to do, and you gotta go do it.
Mm-hmm.
You know, so you just took it in stride. Everybody was drafted.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't hardly any civilians around, you know. I know that cigarettes, you know, the civilians, they couldn't get them, you know. And I remember people would write to me and want me to buy them cigarettes, you know, because we could get them at the PX, you know. But I never did, you know. To start with, against the regulation,
Right.
you couldn't ship that stuff home,
Mm-hmm.
you know. So I'm not gonna, you know, I'm not gonna do something to leave myself open for
Sure.
Leavenworth.
Mm-hmm.
You know, that's where you can go, you know. So I didn't do that, you know, but it was hard coming back. I went back to the bullpipe.
Mm-hmm.
When I got home, I went and asked him, "Can I get my old job back?" He said, "Hell yeah, you get your old job back." So I remember he said, "Give me a week or two to get you worked in," and So I went back and worked for them. It's really the only place I ever worked, really. Is, didn't mount anything, you know. As a teenager, I worked around a little,
Sure.
but I worked at the blowpipe, and then I started my own place. I had my own place 35 years.
Right.
You know, so.
All right. Well, the whole thing makes for a pretty good story, so thank you for taking the time to share it today.
Yeah, I said to Blanche, you know, I said, you think if I went on my own I could make it? She says, probably, you ain't got enough sense to quit. So that's what we did, you know. But,
All right.